on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
The disconnect, and one of them says that one study said that children today can recognize over 1,000 corporate logos and less than a dozen of the native plants and animals that live in the area where they are.
Wow.
And it's a measure of our exposure to electronic media and to other kinds of advertising. Mm-hmm. They are literate because they're learning what's in front of them, but they're not literate in the earth and the water and the space around them that is sustaining them.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at iapssin.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Koopman.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Koopman, Executive Director of the IPSS. This podcast is being delivered by our IPSS team and produced by our friends at Edge Media Studios. As Executive Director of IPSS, I'm excited to bring you this weekly show where we feature Indiana education innovators from all over our great state, from students to superintendents. We'll also be talking to higher education leaders and educators at the state level as we work together as proactive public education advocates. That's why IPS is here and why we're proud to bring you this show. Every week, we're talking about trending topics in the public education space while bringing in Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. As with any organization, it takes great leadership to be successful, and that is one of the main missions of IPSS, developing great school district leaders. It's always great to have experienced and passionate educators joining the show. So let's get started with today's conversation.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guests are Melissa Moran and Stephanie Schuck. Melissa is with the Nature Conservancy, and Stephanie runs the Nina Mason Pulliam Eco Lab at Marian University. They've made several presentations as well as numerous public speaking engagements. So they have been instrumental in shaping the conversation about Indiana public schools and have the ability to look at education from various lenses, which is very important. They have been tremendous assets to Indiana public education. Let's find out how they view issues in Indiana public schools. Welcome, Mrs. Moran, Ms. Schuck. We are absolutely thrilled to have you joining us on today's podcast. Both Melissa and Stephanie are advocates for connecting children and youth to nature. Stephanie, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about the lab and what you do there.
Right. So the Nina Mason Pulliam Eco Lab is actually on Marian University campus. It is about 75 acres of restored forest and wetland prairie. We have some riparian area as Crooked Creek goes down. We have over 3 miles of trails, so and we are open to the public from dawn to dusk. So if you want to just come out and take a walk, you can certainly do that. We also do a lot of public programming, and we do a lot of K through 12 programming. So my title is rather long. It's the Outdoor Education and Restoration Coordinator. Okay. And what that basically means is I have two main jobs. I oversee a lot of the education that we do in the Eco Lab, and most of that is environmental education. We use nature to teach anything really, but we are focused on environmental education, and it's usually K through 12. But the public programs are, we do nature hikes and wildflower walks and anything outdoor learning is what we do.
They're super fun if you haven't been on one before.
She's came to our owl prows before, and sometimes they're frog prows, how it goes. And then we also do a lot of restoration. So we have a lot of invasive species. We have a lot of trail maintenance that needs to happen. So I have undergraduate students from Marian University help me with that. And so they're learning. They are biology students, and they are learning how to do restoration. They are learning how to identify plants and animals, and helping me in the process. So those are kind of the two things that I do. And it's a really great, Marian University is extremely lucky to have that space to use for lots of different subjects. A lot of the art professors will use the Eco Lab, and a lot of the writing professors as well. So there are a lot of people down there.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And thank you for that work. It's so important. So, Melissa, let's talk a little bit about you and the Nature Conservancy and what you do there.
Yeah, thanks, JT, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today to talk about kids in nature. As you mentioned, I work for the Nature Conservancy. We're a statewide organization and actually a global organization, but here in Indiana, the Nature Conservancy works to protect lands and waters upon which all life depends, and we have nature preserves that we care for from the northwest part of the state, in the Kankakee Sands area, in the Indiana Dunes, all the way down to southeast Indiana in Harrison County, and we also do work in southwest Indiana to help protect the Wabash River. So we work for protection of a lot of different kinds of habitats in Indiana. In the bicentennial year, we undertook a special project called the Children of Indiana Nature Park, and that's the project that I lead at the Nature Conservancy, in recognition of the fact that many of the people who now are investing in protection of our lands grew up in contact with the natural world, be it hunting, exploration, hiking, bird watching, and that is not happening anymore with the next generation. So this project, the Children of Indiana Nature Park, has me working with folks like Stephanie and trying to help spread the message that we need to do more to help our children reconnect with our natural world.
And I'm proud to say that IPSS had the opportunity to kind of partner with you and explain that program throughout the state. And in my way of thinking, that was a very successful partnership, and I enjoyed it so much. So I want to thank you for that opportunity as well. So you guys have great jobs, you know.
We do, don't we?
and so how does your work connect with education, and how would you like to take that to the next level?
Well, so as Melissa had mentioned, like in these modern times, it's important to be intentional on getting children outside because they're not experiencing it the way that they used to. And so it's really important to be able to make sure that we make time to get kids outside. It's not just about nature play necessarily. So I hear that a lot, nature play, and it's important to get outside and play because we all know play is important. It helps kids to practice the skills that they'll need as adults, but they're also learning lots of things. At Marian, we do a lot of field trips. We do STEM camp. So our STEM camps, they're actually on Marian University campus, but they spend a lot of time outside because, like I said, you can use nature to teach anything. So you can use it, of course, to teach science. That's pretty obvious, but you can also use it to teach art, history, engineering. For example, in the Eco Lab, we have a pond, and we have a beaver colony on the pond. And so that's, number one, super cool. Yeah. But
right
then
here
also,
in Indianapolis.
right here, right, exactly, right here in Indianapolis. But then also, it's a species that kids really can engage with and they really like. And they don't have to see that beaver to know or to be interested in it, because the beavers, well, as people know, they like to cut things down and they like to modify their environment. They're engineers. They are nature's engineers. And so that goes straight into being able to teach about what engineering exactly is and giving them the ability to kind of try that out. So I feel like it's extremely important that we don't downplay that word play, because I feel like kids are having less unstructured time to be able to do those things and to experience things and explore. And really that's what we do. So we are engaging children outside and giving them time to explore, but then also, giving them that unstructured time, but then also teaching them in the process.
At the outset here, perhaps our audience is not that familiar with Marian University and where you're located. So why don't you just tell us where you're located and a little bit
Sure.
about the university while we're at it?
Yeah. So we are just north of downtown, pretty much on the west side, pretty much 30th and Cold Spring Road. We're a pretty small university, but we are mighty. We've got the Klipsch Educators College there, and actually the Eco Lab falls under the Educators College, and they're doing some really amazing things in the state of Indiana and nationally as well with education. And so I feel very fortunate to be able to be a part of that as well. And then, we've got a lot of students, education students, biology students, that have a lot of interest and do a lot of research in the Eco Lab. But then again, I'm always trying to make those connections with other people. You don't have to want to be a field biologist to be concerned about conservation. And so it's really making these conservation-minded citizens, regardless of whether they want to be a doctor or a teacher or an engineer, that you can be a conservationist no matter what you do.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that. Melissa, anything you want to add to that message?
I think Stephanie stated it perfectly. So we're here hoping to maybe plant the seeds with some of your audience, your superintendents, for new ways to think about education that might incorporate the outdoors.
Okay, perfect.
And I will say real quick too that we it's field trips, and that is sometimes a really hard thing for teachers to do. A lot of it has to do with money and time, but we also align our field trips and our curriculum with state standards, because we know that helps teachers, and we want to help teachers out any way that we can. Sure. So that's one thing that maybe superintendents or teachers might be interested in knowing, is that we do actually align, and a lot of nature centers do the same.
Sure, absolutely. So, if you will, what's different in modern times as opposed to the past?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll start out a little bit, and then I'm going to let Melissa take over. So, busy schedules. We all have busy schedules, right? And sometimes I feel myself overscheduled with things, and I don't have the time to do the hobby things that I really enjoy and are also really important for mental stimulation. But children are spending half as much time outdoors than they were 20 years ago. They're spending an average of 6 to 7 hours a day on a screen, so that's technology, right? So that could be an iPad, a cell phone, a computer, and their unstructured time has declined by 50%. So that's a lot, and I think that with what we do, trying to get them outside helps to kind of balance this out.
Well, I certainly know that as a kid I was never inside, so
Right.
there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Melissa?
And what Stephanie's describing is happening really on a global scale. There's a shift of population. If you go back to the turn of the century at 1900, so 120 years ago, 40% of the population in the United States was living on a farm or in a rural area. And through their day-to-day life, there was contact with the natural world. And it's not just being in it. It's when you're there, you're an observant person. You take note of what's happening around you.
Yep.
And our powers of observation are kind of diminishing because we don't have this kind of contact. Fast forward now, so that 40% has reduced to about 2% of the population because so many people are now living in the urban areas. Wow. So what that means is that there's 2% of the people on the planet who are really tuned in to what's happening on a day-to-day basis in their natural world. And the rest of us, 98%, are no longer exposed to that in a way that we're reminded of it on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And there are some scientists now talking about this phenomenon, the shift to the urban area, and what that means to our relationship with the environment as an extinction of experience.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Can you explain what this extinction of experience is all about?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of research happening right now. There are both social scientists and medical scientists that are measuring on an individual level and on human beings what are the benefits of people spending time in nature, both for our mental health as well as our physical health. Sure. And it applies equally to adults and children, but we're here today to kind of focus on young people. Beyond that, if you extend that forward, if we don't have an experience as a young person that connects us to our natural world, then there's a separation. We don't understand it, and we're not inclined, we don't know about it, so we're not inclined to take care of it. So we have a large percentage of the population who is entirely dependent on the condition of the systems in our natural world who are not familiar with those systems. And there's a concern about who is going to be the next generation to help take care of our natural resources, the water, the air, the soil that we all depend on.
Yeah. It's frightening when you really think about it. And there doesn't seem to be the focus, unless it comes from individuals like yourself, as far as a national focus that I think that we absolutely need. So I'm honored to have this opportunity to kind of spread that message. So thank you so much. So Stephanie, can you share about how time in nature can help with learning in the classroom?
Sure. So I spend so much time with students outside, and most of that time is gauging their comfort level being outside. We have some classes that come out and you can tell that they spend a lot of time outside, they feel more comfortable.
Right.
And then you have other classes that as soon as they get off the bus, something buzzes by their head and they're terrified. And they don't know what to expect. And they ask if there are bears or alligators in the pond. And do we have wolves? Which are all great questions. And I love those questions. So we go over those questions because that's also history, right? We used to have them and we don't now. And why is that? But at the same time, you know, like we've said, they're not spending as much time outside, so they're equating the outdoors with that jungle movie they saw the other day, and so they don't know what to expect. And what they do expect a lot of times is fear, like what's going to hurt me out here. So some of the groups, it's really all about just getting them comfortable outside and realizing that not all the bees are out there to sting you, and not all the snakes are out there to bite you, and we can all visit their home and be respectful, just like we would want someone visiting our home to be respectful. And so when I have them out there, a lot of it's about exploration and not just giving them the answers. So practicing skills like critical thinking skills and exploration and observation skills. Yep. These are all things that scientists do. These are all things that people do, and we should, we're practicing. Again, they're practicing their skills to be, adults that can think critically about situations. Yep. And when they do that, that really helps them with their focus. So if we expect, I know I have a really hard time with my focus. If I'm in my office the entire day for a couple of days, I feel like I'm kind of losing my mind, and I have to just go out and take a walk. But that's also, that's good. You can take a breath, you can be outside, but that is stimulating your brain in a different way than if you were inside, right? So you're feeling the breeze on your face, you're hearing different sounds, you're having all these things happen that weren't happening inside while you were looking at a screen. Yep. So all these things are important. I have to be inside to do my job sometimes and be on a computer, but we also have to make sure that we take time to go outside as well. They'll also work on their social skills. The younger ones, the littles, will work on their fine motor skills. So maybe balancing on a log or jumping from one to the other, or dip netting in the pond and trying to see what they can find in there. So they're learning lots of different things, but it's fun, right? And so they're not realizing they're learning it, and they're practicing a lot of these things.
Yeah. Well, I certainly know I feel better when I'm outside, so there you go. Melissa, anything you want to add to that as far as how nature affects learning?
There's some interesting statistics there, maybe take it in a slightly different direction, that are measuring the disconnect. And one of them says that one study said that children today can recognize over 1,000 corporate logos and less than a dozen of the native plants and animals that live in the area where they are. Wow. And it's a measure of our exposure to electronic media and to other kinds of advertising. They are literate because they're learning what's in front of them, but they're not literate in the earth and the water and the space around them that is sustaining them. Yep. So it's interesting that we've been able to measure that, and shocking at the same time.
Absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
So along those same lines, we have, at least I think we have a realization that much can be learned from being outside in addition to just kind of clearing the head. You think nature has an effect on behavior?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, saying all this, I don't expect everybody to, want to go outside and camp for weeks on end, and not everybody is outdoorsy. I understand that. But I think that everyone can benefit from it in certain ways. And so maybe for some people that is hiking the Appalachian Trail, and maybe for some it's just going to the park and sitting on the bench and listening to birds. But again, it's fostering that connection, which I see so much more disconnect with kids now than I have in the past. And a lot of times when I'm talking about this with people and with groups, I say kids a lot. I say children a lot, but I'm sure to remind them that it's children of all age, kids of all ages, right? So we're all kids at heart, and so it's reminding the adults and setting up our children for success in the future, to be comfortable with their world and to understand it. And like Melissa mentioned, not just seeing that wall of green, but seeing all the things in it. There are 10 species of tree and 50 species of wildflowers, and what does that mean? Who depends on that? And what would happen if that were to go away? It's the ecology of it, learning about those relationships. And that really, I think, is mind expanding, and it just fosters a sense of curiosity that kids have, and wants them to find out more and learn more.
Yep, I agree with that. Melissa?
I know one of the things that I've been hearing about lately is some of the high schoolers going to college and maybe not being as prepared to be patient with the process of learning, and that when you get to college and you need to do a research study, it can be several years. And one of the things that happens when you're in nature is if you're observing something, you kind of step in sync with what it is that you're observing, and you're realizing that that bug isn't, it's not walking very fast, or the butterfly's in its cocoon and its chrysalis, and it's not going to hatch for 12 or 14 days. Mm-hmm. And understanding that that's part of the process is such an important skill to learn. And that happens because we pause long enough to make the observation and to take the information in. And it kind of goes back to Stephanie saying, how overscheduled we are, but there's value. I think we tend to think of, we have to spend our time very specifically. We're doing this, and this. And we're missing out on that opportunity to observe, and our brain does need time to disconnect from the busyness in order to be able to observe. But then it's step one in the scientific method. We're so focused right now in STEM, and yet the first thing that needs to happen in the process is pause, take a deep breath, look at what you see, make the observation before you say, well, my hypothesis is, this is what's going to happen next. Sure. Yeah. So it's connected. Taking that time and making the time and learning about the ecosystems, because they move on a scale that isn't the speed of an iPhone.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So along that same vein, how do you think that spending time in nature affects children's health and their well-being?
Well, it reduces stress, and it really it helps them with focus, because as we've said, it's if your brain is go all the time, it needs a break, but it's still working when there's that break. And so I'd say those are probably two of the most important things. But it also helps with depression. It helps with anxiety. It helps, talking about nearsightedness. So, think about, I have to pay attention to myself when I've got my phone and I'm really looking at something, like, my posture is awful. My eyes are really close up to the screen. And so just having something different to look at is really super important. And I mean, there are studies now that are showing that, there are all these benefits to being out in nature. And again, like I said, you don't have to be hiking a trail for 10 days, just being out and doing whatever interests you, or whatever you're curious about, whatever that child is curious about, and not necessarily having the immediate answer. So they'll ask me a lot, well, what is that? And I'll say, well, what do you think it is? So they might not get the answer right away. I hope that they come around to it. So it's more about learning and less about knowing that answer right away and then moving on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's learning behaviors, and one of my favorite headlines I read in an article once was called "Farm Dirt Benefits Kids' Health" or something like that. But it was a paired health study of children who grew up in an Amish farm with urban children. And they don't really know exactly the what and the why of the cause of it, but they do know that the children who grew up in the farm, working with animals, constantly around their crops, they have less incidence of asthma. So there's some benefit that happens in our exposure to the natural world. And Stephanie's reference to hypertension, I know there was a study done in Australia in adults, and they asked the adults to take just 30 minutes a day to immerse themselves in a green space where they couldn't see anything that was man-made or human-made. And there was a measurable reduction both in hypertension, so heart health, as well as depression by 7 to 9% in both of those. So there's also a cost to our society when we're when we're not able to make time to connect to kind of our heritage, right? Our natural heritage. It affects our health very directly. And children, I'm sure, start to feel that even quicker than adults do.
Yeah. Well, I also, in perhaps the study is similar, that your autoimmune system and everything is, if you work outside and you work in the dirt and you do those kinds of things, is that your immune system is much stronger as a result of those things. So just your natural health, I think, is affected by being outdoors and doing those kinds of things. So
yeah, and obesity rates in ages 6 to 11 have doubled, and it's tripled in adolescents. And so we have a lot of sports, and sports are really important for teamwork and for fitness and all of that, but not every student, not every child is involved in sports, and not everyone wants to be either, just like not everybody wants to hike the Appalachian Trail. But it is yet another way for us to combat that, because you're likely, if you are spending more time outside, you're more likely to be more active than if you weren't.
Right.
And so and we have to sometimes guide our children into doing that. So helping them by being an example and taking them on walks, taking them on hikes, going out to the pond across the street just to see what's out there.
Yeah, I agree. So what ways can schools and school districts be engaged with your organizations?
Well, I'll start because we do field trips. And we do, and a lot of other, outdoor organizations and spaces do. So I'll speak for all nature centers, but especially for my own, that we do field trips. We offer them year-round. We have themed field trips. They're all environmental science-based, but of course we touch on a lot of the different subjects, and they are spending time outside. And one thing that's important, I think, for teachers to understand is that, again, I don't expect everybody to be that person that's going to, all right, I'm going to take all of my students outside and we're going to explore. They might not be comfortable with that, and that's okay, because I am. And so bring your students to me, bring them to our instructors. That's what we do. So we are comfortable and we know the things that are out there. And that's the important thing too, is that you don't have to know what every bird is or every fish or insect or plant is to take your kids outside. It's perfectly okay to say, I don't know. I think that's one important thing we try to teach them, is you don't necessarily have to know everything, but you can find out. That's a whole point of exploration. So letting us, bringing your students to us and letting us do that for you, we'd be happy to do that. Now, if other things too, is you can just take them outside and hold class outside. I teach a first-year seminar at Marian University, and it is all outside. We teach it in the Eco Lab, and so our students know it's in bold. This class is outside. So when it's raining, we are outside. When it's cold, we are outside. And they have a great time with it because it's different than all the other classes that they have.
Yeah.
And that's a thing too. So, you might get into a rut and, your kids aren't paying attention or, everybody seems to be jittery. Go outside and take a walk or do an activity outside that might help a little bit with their jitteriness.
There's a lot of research in relationship to recess.
Mm-hmm.
And how kids perform in the classroom if they are allowed recess time and that opportunity to, as you say, get the jitters out. All of those kids have all of that pent-up energy, and that pent-up energy needs to be released in a physical way. So the importance of research, or the recess and the research that's done on that, is there's a direct correlation to what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to add there, Melissa?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Children of Indiana Nature Park at the beginning of our talk here and our introductions, and we have a website called ilovemyland.org that is a way that we can invite children into thinking of themselves as caretakers of the land. Right. So when the park was created in 2016 for the bicentennial, it was created in a way that there were over 1 million deeds in this park that are intended for all of the students in Indiana to claim one. So we hope that teachers and schools will use this as a resource to invite their children, their students to learn more about nature. There is some information on the website because we know that in the classroom we've got lots of digital resources. Sure. But much of the information also points them outside, so they might learn about plant or animal species that they could see or find in Indiana. And then we also have nature center partners all over Indiana. The Nina Mason Pulliam and Eco Lab and Stephanie are one of those, but there are a dozen or more others around Indiana that we encourage schools to contact to be the resource that Stephanie described. If you want, some of them can come into the classroom even and give science lessons. All of them are able to receive students as field trips. So we do hope that that this can be a tool, a springboard to help spark some interest in kids getting reconnected to nature. ilovemyland.org.
That's a great opportunity for kids. I can just see all kinds of lessons springboarding out of that. If I remember correctly, that's located over on the east side of the state around Richmond in Wayne County.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, the park is, the Children of Indiana Nature Park is a part of the Cope Environmental Center. So it's near Richmond in Centerville, Indiana. It's a 30-acre park, and it's trying to also redefine what we think of as park. So most children, if you ask them, because we live in urban areas, what do you think of when you think of the word park? Sure. They'll say things like, oh, it has swings, or it has a ball field, or a soccer field, or a playground set. And this park is a nature park. It has trails, tracks, turtles, we like to say, and a way for them with their phone and their GPS, they can navigate to the GPS coordinate that's on their deed. So each student who has a deed is encouraged to go find it. If not in person, they can use the web app as well to find it virtually. But again, that place is a place, and then to start thinking about, well, it's a nature park. It's not a a playground park. What does it mean to be a caretaker or a landowner of a nature park? And start answering some of those kinds of questions.
Great. So what are some of the other resources that might be available for administrators and teachers to help us connect kids with nature?
I'll start with the environmental literacy guidelines. I am a member of the Environmental Education Association of Indiana, and This is not theirs. This is definitely, it's a collaborative effort. It was to provide guidance to educators in creating environmentally literate citizens, which is kind of what we've been talking about today. And so there were people from all over the state that created this. EEAI just happens to have it, but the Department of Education, Purdue, lots of other universities, education and other educational institutions, and then of course restoration professionals and other environmental professionals like Department of Natural Resources, Nature Conservancy as well. And so it's basically guidelines for educators, teachers, informal and formal, to use to create our environmentally literate students and citizens. So it is available on the EEAI website, eeai.org, and you can find it really easily there. We've also aligned it with state standards. That's not up yet, so we've just done that, and we're working on getting that up on the website. But it's so that just we're trying to make it a little bit easier for teachers to be able to use, because we know that teachers are swamped and they are busy and they are trying to do the best they can with what they have. And so we want to make it easier for them to be able to do these things, incorporate these things into their curriculum or into their classroom activities, bringing their students to us or having us come to them. We want to make sure that it's not a burden and it's something that's easy for them to do.
Great.
Yeah, other resources would be the Indiana Children in Nature Network, which is a project of EEAI, Environmental Education Association of Indiana. You can find that at indianachildreninnature.org. There's the I Can Play 30 pledge, so parents, teachers, anybody with young ones can go to the I Can webpage and pledge to play outside for 30 minutes every day. And we'll send them emails quarterly, just giving them some ideas on activities, because a lot of times seasonally activities will change. So give them some ideas on things to do outside with their kids. And then I'll let Melissa talk about a couple of videos from ilovemyland.org.
Yeah. So one of the things I think that I would like to ask superintendents or school leaders to think about is even just sharing the message with your parents. You may or may not have a lot of flexibility to do more with recess or field trips or curriculum. But if you can share the message with parents and encourage, maybe a homework assignment is to go walk, take a walk in the woods with your family, right? And write a note about what you observe. So there are some resources that we have through ilovemyland.org that you can share with your parents. There's a video that is really about a mom and her two kids, a short video that you can share. And then we also have one that's reaching out to educators, JT, that you were a part of as well. So inviting teachers and educators to think of them. So ilovemyland.org also has access to those two videos. You can use those to invite the families, the members of your schools, as well as your teachers to use those.
So along those same lines, shared a lot of information today, which is great information, and some of those ideas that you just mentioned, Melissa, I thought were fabulous ideas, especially the homework assignment. So are there other things that we can tell our listeners about and how we can connect our kids with nature? Are there other things we can do?
I hear most often when people hear about environmental education, there's a little switch that says, "Oh, it's science." But the opportunity to change your environment, to learn about the natural world, can really happen in any kind of classroom. So, reading what you read about, and then where you read, you can go outside and have that change of environment that allows your brain to just decompress, to get away from the flickering artificial lights. So thinking about where we teach and then how we teach. Like I love the homework assignment of, to go observe something. And that could be any subject, really, and then to write about it in the context of whatever your subject matter is. Thinking of the subtle ways to incorporate it rather than it being an overwhelming, gosh, I have to, follow this exact curriculum, might be an easier way to introduce it. And if families are able to do that too, it's actually, it's healthier for the student. They'll perform better. The parents will feel better. Teachers say that if they have an opportunity to go outside also, they feel better coming back into the classroom. So the subtle ways might be easier ways to start to try to incorporate some of these things into what a school is doing.
Yeah, I agree. Give you a perfect example. This morning when I walked outside, stars were everywhere. It was beautiful. And on top of all that, there was a hoot owl that was hooting in the background. So it was a good morning.
That's a great morning.
That's a great morning. You practice your hoot owl call?
As you're talking, though, I'm just thinking of especially when you mentioned fear of being in the outdoors, is the number of kids that would go, "What's that? What is that?" And would be fearful, as opposed to having any appreciation for an owl sitting in a tree and hooting.
Yeah, and that's what I really try to do. Instead of the "What's that?" I want them to go, "Oh, what's that?" That's what I want. I want that not being controlled by your fear, but instead of being controlled by, I want to know what all of these things are and what their importance is. What do they do, and how does that affect me?
Be inquisitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank both of you. Is there anything that you'd like to mention in closing that we haven't covered?
So, I know one thing for me. We mentioned Richard Louv, I think, a little bit ago. So his book, Last Child in the Woods, is one of the books that was kind of like a call for environmental educators, but really for everybody to really focus on making sure that we keep that connection with nature, or we reconnect if we've lost it. And so that's always a great book. Just if you're interested, if this is interesting to you and you want to learn more about that, that's a great book. And he's written a lot of other books too. And he was originally the one that started the Children in Nature Network. So that's a great organization. They have a lot of great resources too. And then he's going to be here. So he'll be at Butler University on November 1st. And tickets aren't available yet, but they will be, and they're free. You have to get a ticket, but it's a free ticket. And then he's going to be at McCormick's Creek State Park for Environmental Education Association of Indiana's conference and our 50th anniversary on November 2nd. So if you want to see what he has to say, you can certainly do that. And all of that information will be on EEAI's website, ICANN's website, the Indiana Children in Nature Network, and other places too.
Sure, that's awesome. We also, as a state, in my opinion, have fabulous state parks.
We do.
And great opportunities for families to go out and enjoy nature and hike trails and see the different parts of Indiana where, the terrain is different, the natural habitat is different. All of those things are great learning opportunities. And to have the state parks that we have available, I think is absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, and the staff there are great, and the naturalists put on really great programs, and they're free, a lot of them. So most of them are free, and they're short, so it's not a long time, but you can go explore the park, maybe go to a program about turtles, and then go explore a little bit more. So, yeah, definitely use those as a resource.
Yep, absolutely.
Any park that's close to you, take advantage of it.
Yeah, and they are
Local,
close.
county, or
depending
state.
upon where you live.
Yeah.
They're not too far away.
Yeah.
So good for you. Well, I want to thank both of you for being our guest on Indiana Education Insight. And let me tell you that on behalf of children in this state, I thank you for your work and for what you're trying to do for them. I think it's important. So really appreciate you being here today and talking about that program or your program. So thank you. We'll do anything we can to help you get the word out.
Great. Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
us.
JT and IAPSS, for having us, and for your listeners to taking time to listen to our message today too.
Absolutely. So now it's time for me to wrap up this episode of Indiana Education Insight with my take on some of the current affairs that are happening in the Indiana education landscape.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
There are many factors that go into preparing all students to become lifelong learners and contributors in the 21st century. We are starting another school year with great excitement, and I can think of few more joyous occasions than kids returning to school with new clothes, shoes, backpacks, and school supplies, and maybe their first ride on a school bus. And of course, we have the parents' anxiety and the tears and the fears of the kids leaving the house and going out into the world. Rest assured, we have the safest schools and the best prepared teachers and administrators ready to welcome and take care of our kids in Indiana schools. Have a wonderful school year. Make sure that you see these as investments in our children and our state and not as expenditures. Perhaps we can pursue this issue and others in another segment of Indiana Education Insight. Please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.